Hello, this is again Dr. Yonatan Bentwich, and I'm very glad to give a lecture in this wonderful annual Real conference. And what I want to present to you today, this is the New Gods physics book, which I wrote and was just published in the USA. In the US, it's been published by iUniverse.com, and it's called God's Physics, a New Scientific Paradigm for the 21st Century. And there's also some newspaper articles that came out. This is in Yediot about the book and about the revolution that it's creating in science. And so but I wrote this book for the general public. By the way, for Jews and Gentiles, I think that this book is very, very important because, and it's very relevant for obviously for Geula. And what I want to talk to you about is about this new revolution in science, what this new paradigm says, and it's quite amazing. There's actually some chapters in the book that speak about the fact that there is a convergence, just as in Chitetu Chavotam Leitim, in the Nevuah, in the prophecy about the Geula, and about the convergence of science and Hasidic thought. This appears in the book, but let me walk you through so that you understand what a great revolution this is in science, and what this tells us as Jews, as Hasidim. And so I just want to begin by stating the obvious, that science has reached a dead end. That is the old paradigm of relativity theory, which Einstein's relativity theory, which talks about the macroscopic universe, and quantum mechanics, which speaks about the microscopic subatomic realm. These two models of 20th century physics, of the old paradigm, they seem to collide. They don't agree with each other. So that's a major problem for science. Einstein started working on this problem 100 years ago. And he was asked actually one time, what would he wish for the fate of his relativity theory to be in 100 years? Does he think that it would be true forever? It would stand forever? And Einstein, being very humble, Einstein obviously a Jew. He has the Etpashtuta de Moshe. He has this spark of Moshe Rabbeinu, Raya Mehemna, which is leading in the Siyado, the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach, is leading Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, and the world towards Geula. And so he had this, Einstein also, as any Jew, has this spark, this element of Moshe Rabbeinu. He was humble, not as Moshe Rabbeinu, but he was humble. And when he was asked, what does he wish for the fate of relativity theory to be in 100 years, he said, I don't think that relativity theory would stand forever. I just hope that relativity theory would become a special case within a broader understanding. And one of the things that I say in the lectures and in the book as well is that science evolves. Science has to expand its understanding. And science right now is reaching the point where it's converging really with Hasidic thought, which I'll talk about briefly. So Einstein's relativity theory about the macroscopic universe, quantum mechanics about the microscopic universe, these are part of the old paradigm. The old paradigm, I call it material causality. Basically, it has the assumption that everything in the universe happens because of a certain interaction between material elements. So, for example, relativity theory would say that the universe was created by an initial Big Bang nuclear explosion or event. And obviously, this new theory, God's physics paradigm, negates that. And I'll explain why in a second. But the idea is that the old model, first of all, doesn't work any longer because relativity theory and quantum mechanics contradict each other, and also because the old model, the old material causal paradigm, cannot explain where up to 95% of all the mass and energy in the world, where does it exist? The universe is known, is being observed to accelerate, and so it's expanding, and galaxies are getting further and further out and more distant from each other, and that acceleration cannot be explained by the old model. So the way that the old material causal paradigm explains that is by assuming that there is dark matter, dark energy, which is just hypothetical concept. Nobody has been able to verify it, and this is reminiscent of what happened in Einstein's time, where Einstein essentially also there was the ether concept that science thought perfuses or exists in space, and nobody could detect it. And then Einstein, in his genius, said, "We'll discard it. If it cannot be observed, then let's cancel it." And then he developed relativity theory. And what's happening in God's physics new paradigm for the 21st century is very similar. So essentially, what this God's physics new paradigm is saying is, listen, first of all, dark matter, dark energy doesn't exist because we can't observe it. So we have to expand our understanding. The major discovery of God's physics, and that's why not by Hashgacha Pratit, by providence, the name of this theory, initially I called it the computational unified field theory, after Einstein's visionary quest for a unifying field theory that would resolve this problem between relativity theory and quantum mechanics. Some say that even on his deathbed he was scribbling equations trying to find that one equation that would integrate relativity theory and quantum mechanics and would actually integrate the four basic physical features of space-time, energy, and mass, which I'll talk about in a second. So the major discovery of God's physics paradigm, which is quite amazing, and it's converging with Jewish thought, Jewish and Hasidic thought, is the fact that we have this singular, higher ordered, what I call universal consciousness principle or reality. This universal consciousness or computational principle, in Hasidic terms, in religious terms, we obviously recognize that this is the power of the Shem. But this higher ordered universal consciousness reality is producing Ratzo v'shuv. It's producing every billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a second. It's producing the whole universe as one reality, as one picture, one three-dimensional picture. And so that's creation and then dissolution. Then the whole universe dissolves back into this UCP or universal consciousness principle or reality. So in between, and then again another frame, another universal frame. So every time the universal consciousness principle creates the universal frame of the whole universe simultaneously, everything in the world is created simultaneously or computed simultaneously by this universal consciousness principle or reality, and then it dissolves back into this UCP, and then again it creates the universe, and it goes Ratzo and Shuv, creation, dissolution, creation, dissolution, creation, and then every picture of the universe is being expanded, is being more elaborate by this universal consciousness principle. And that's, by the way, if I have some time to speak about it, that's, by the way, one of the critical predictions of this new God's physics paradigm, which differentiates it from relativity theory and quantum mechanics. One of these critical predictions has to do with the fact that we understand with this new God's physics paradigm that the universe is being expanded by the universal consciousness reality, not dark matter, dark energy, which don't exist, but solely by the operation and the development of the universe by this universal consciousness reality. That's why the universe is expanding. And by the way, one of the critical predictions is that it's happening, there is a leap that's happening every new Jewish Rosh Hashanah, New Year. That's when there is a real jump in the rate of acceleration. So maybe I'll talk about it also. So the major discovery made by this new God's physics paradigm, which is quite amazing, it's exactly like what a Hasidic thought is saying. It's the pnimiut of the Torah. It's the internal light of the Torah of Judaism. Pnimiut Torah is saying, just as the Baal Shem Tov said, "Leolam dvarcha nitzav Hashem b'shamayim," that the power of the power of the Shem, the dibur of the Shem that's creating the universe, and it's creating it again and again, Ratzo and Shuv. So this is what the new God's physics paradigm is saying, but except it's saying it in very scientific terms. And by the way, at the bottom of this new book, and it appears within the book, there is a universal computational formula, and that universal computational formula, lo and behold, is telling us, and see, by the way, the illustration, the beautiful illustration by the painter, the Nachshon from Kiryat Arba, and at the center of that painting is the Yud. And the Yud is actually how I chose to represent this universal consciousness reality. And so in the universal computational formula, at the heart of this new God's physics paradigm of 21st century physics and science more generally, there is the universal computational formula. And the universal computational formula shows how this Yud, which is a representation of this universal consciousness principle, how this Yud is computing simultaneously every pixel in the universe, creating this frame, every time a frame and dissolution and another frame, etc. So it's computing all the pixels, all the points in the frame, all the elements, all the atoms and the molecules and our bodies and trees and planets and plants and everything in the universe is being computed by this universal conscious reality many billions of times per second. And it's also integrating for the first time this universal computational formula. For the first time, it integrates completely space, time, energy, and mass. And that's perhaps something that is worthwhile just saying briefly. Einstein, in his relativity theory, was able to unify between space and time. So space-time became a four-dimensional continuum. He was able to unify between energy and mass. That's the famous E equals mc square, or the energy mass equivalence, which stands at the basis of the atomic energy and also atomic bomb. And also he was able to say in general relativity theory that space-time is being curved by massive objects. And so he was able to unify between a few of those elements, but not all of them. This universal computational formula, for the first time in physics, is able to unify these four elements of space, time, energy, and mass. I don't have the length here to elaborate, but essentially, universal computational principle computes for every point the degree to which it's changing between one frame and another. And that gives us in different ways the space, energy, time, and mass. Okay? Now, I want to say why this paradigm is very important for us as Jewish believers, as Hasidim, and more generally for the whole world, as I said, for Jews and non-Jews in different ways, but it's very significant. So the old paradigm was a material causal paradigm. And the old paradigm, which is stuck in our brain, so to speak, because it affects our lives and our perception of things, the old paradigm tells us that the world operates essentially by cause and effect, and it's material interaction. I'll give you simple examples. Now we're getting out of, I hope, the pandemic of the COVID-19. And the basic assumption that people have, scientists and non-scientists, is that this pandemic is caused by a virus, and therefore the vaccination would take care of the virus, and it's all cause and effect. But again, really, from the perspective, so this is one example of material causality. Our old perception of the world is that it's just cause and effect. Same thing about how the universe was created. The universe was created supposedly by the old model of relativity theory by a Big Bang nuclear explosion. So the whole of the universe was condensed in a lump of very concentrated matter, perhaps the size of a tennis ball. And then there was this nuclear explosion, nuclear event that started creating suns, galaxies, planets, mass, energy, space, time, etc. And so the creation of the universe was supposedly random. It just happened. And the expansion of the universe is assumed to be just a random effect because of this explosion, because of the dark matter, dark energy, which again cannot be observed, so they have to be discarded. But nevertheless, the old model is saying everything in the world and the universe is happening by cause and effect. It's random. So the universe was created by a random event, a nuclear explosion or event. The universe is drifting into nothingness. It's expanding. The suns will die. According to the second law of thermodynamics, the whole universe will die, essentially, expand and dissolve. And so where does that leave us, human beings, and obviously and Jewish people or Jews? Where does that leave us? If the whole universe was created by a random event, it's drifting into nothingness. Worse than that, according to this cause and effect material causal old paradigm, even the evolution of biological animals and human beings is assumed by Darwin to have been caused just by random cause and material interaction between animals and their environment, genetic mutations caused by ultraviolet radiation. It's, again, completely random, and obviously that's not the knowledge that we have in the Bible, in the Torah, but the old model is saying, well, it's all random, it's all just material interaction. I want you to understand that this new God's physics paradigm is making a huge revolution, because since this new God's physics paradigm is saying that the whole universe is being created and dissolved many billions of times per second, and each time that the universe is being created by this universal conscious reality, or God's power, every time that the universe is being created in this universal picture or frame, all the points in that frame are computed or created simultaneously. So for example, that's why this new God's physics paradigm, I lectured about it in multiple physics conferences, international physics conferences. I was invited to open international physics conferences with this new paradigm of God's physics of the 21st century. And in some of these lectures, as well as in the book, I clearly stated that God's physics new paradigm negates both the Big Bang model, Darwin's natural selection principle. In fact, it negates the whole idea, the whole assumption, the old assumption that things happen in the universe because of cause and effect. So what's the alternative? Because the universal consciousness principle is computing simultaneously every point in the universe for each of the frames, each of the pictures that it's producing, and then dissolving, and then another picture, and dissolving, another picture. For each of these pictures, each of these universal frames, the universal conscious reality is computing simultaneously all the points within the frame. And because it's computing all the points within the frame simultaneously, there cannot be any cause and effect. I give a metaphor which may be helpful. Imagine that you saw in a film, you saw, let's say, a cup with water, and you saw a hammer that's hitting that glass cup, and then the glass cup is broken and the water is spilled over the table. Now, if I ask you what caused the breakage and the spillage of the water of the cup, you'd say, it's the hammer. I saw it. It's very simple. But if I slowed down the progression of the film, you'd see that in each frame, these two elements appear at the same time. So there cannot be any cause and effect between them. The first frame, it was like this. Second frame, third frame, fourth frame, fifth frame, they're touching each other. But again, they're being presented at the same time, so they can't really affect each other. And then maybe sixth frame, this is broken and the water are spilled. So when you analyze it, you see, this is just a metaphor for this new God's physics paradigm, that there cannot be any cause and effect, neither within any of these frames, because again, the hammer and the glass jar are being presented simultaneously. Even when they're touching, they're being presented simultaneously. So not one thing can affect the other. Hammer can't affect the glass jar because they're both being presented at the same time. So lo and behold, when we understand or start understanding the new God's physics paradigm, we start realizing the God's physics paradigm is also called an acausal computation paradigm, which means there is no causality, no material cause and effect possible. The UCP, the director of the film, in the example of the film, has arranged the pictures to appear in such a way that the proximity, the closeness between these two objects seem to get closer and closer. The director of the film arranged the pictures in such a way, and that's what gives us the impression that there is a cause and effect, but really there's no cause and effect. Just the director has organized the frames in a certain way. So that's a metaphor for God's physics new paradigm, which essentially says, really what's happening is only the universal conscious reality, God's power, is creating the universe and arranging the frames, arranging the universe. Each time a picture of the universe appears, it's arranging the frames, the pictures, or the evolution of the universe to seem to evolve in a certain way. But the Big Bang is negated, because whether it's in the first frame, second frame, third frame, there's no cause and effect, not within the frame, because they're all presented simultaneously, and obviously not between the frames, because the whole universe dissolves back into this universal conscious reality between any two frames. So there cannot be any cause and effect. So this is quite amazing. We start realizing that the universe is not a solid phenomena. It's not a solid reality. The universe is dependent, just as Admor Zaken is saying in Sha'ar Yichud Ve'emunah, is saying that the Shem, the Shem has to create the universe Ratzov all the time, and if those diburim, those sayings by the Shem, Asara Ma'amarot, the world was created in Asara Ma'amarot, in 10 sayings, so to speak, of the Shem. If that, and obviously the different changes that can occur between the letters of the Jewish alphabet. So if the Shem would withdraw that element, that Ma'amarot, the world would dissolve. In the new paradigm of God's physics, it's very similar. The universe has to be sustained all the time by the power of the Shem, which is creating all the time, simultaneously, every universal picture, withdrawing it back into the Shem, and so forth and so on. So we start realizing that the universe is evolved. First, it doesn't exist as a solid entity. Bereshit bara Hashem et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Obviously, the Shem created the world. There is a world that exists, but it really exists, and that's part of what Chassidut and Geula is taking us. The Rebbe Melech HaMashiach said that the only thing that differentiates between Galut, Gola, where we think that we're still in, and between Geula is the Aleph. The Aleph represents Alufo Shel Olam. The Aleph represents the power of the Shem, the presence of the Shem. And so in Geula, where the universe is now transitioning into, with this new God's physics paradigm, is also in science pointing at this movement towards Geula. So the new understanding is that the universe, the world that we know, our bodies, everything around us, doesn't exist as a physical entity per se. It's being animated, it's being produced again and again by this universal consciousness reality, or the power of the Shem. And some of the other important elements, so first of all, we start understanding that the universe, in this theory, the whole universe has Ashgacha Pratit. Everything in the universe is happening because of the power of the Shem. So even when we think, for example, that a virus caused a disease, that's true only in a partial way, because there's no cause and effect. The Shem is producing this series of pictures of the world and evolving the world with a clear aim, and that clear aim. And so in this God's physics new paradigm, it's fascinating. I recommend everybody to read the book, because I wrote it in particularly for the layman reader that can comprehend much of the essentials of this theory. So this theory is saying that the Shem, or the universal conscious reality, is evolving the universe from inanimate, domem, animate, plants, animals, human beings, and towards Geula. The whole progression of the universe is not just by random cause and effect. No, from the beginning till the predestined goal, till the ultimate goal, the Shem is evolving the universe through an expansion of this consciousness. Inanimate matter, then plants, then animals, then human beings. Then human beings are now led into this Geula state, which I clearly and explicitly write about in this theory and in the book. The whole end goal, the whole aim of the Shem, of this universal conscious reality, and producing the world and evolving the world towards this Geula, perfected moral and spiritual state. And another element that, and that's why, by the way, this new God's Physics book And this new paradigm is very important because it will highlight in science the recognition that there's only one reality. Truly, there's only one reality. This is the Shem. And also that this Shem, or this universal conscious reality, cares about in Hashgacha Pratit, evolving the universe towards this perfected state of Geula. And that perfected state of Geula, moral, spiritual, physical, is a state in which everybody, like we say in our Jewish prayer, Yakiru v'yidu kol yoshev v'tevel kelichat ticha chol be'er tishava kol lashon b'yom hayu Hashem echad u'shmo echad, that everybody will recognize that there's only one singular reality, which is the Shem. And not only that, in this new theory, there is a new understanding, a new discovery, which I call the dynamic equilibrium moral principle. And there is a new discovery, fascinating discovery in science, for the first time in science and in physics, that our moral choices make a real difference, because when a Jewish person makes a moral or immoral choice, God forbid immoral choice, we all choose moral choices, and the Rambam says that a Jew always wants to lekayem et mitzvot shel Hashem, and to act morally. And if, God forbid, we miss that sometimes, it's just because of a ruach shtut. It's not really, that's not the real desire of a Jew. So, but anyway, based on our moral choices, when we act in a moral way, this leads the Shem, or the Shem would then select for us one of multiple possible futures that are midah keneged midah. If I chose, or if a person chose to help another person, the Shem will select for that individual that helped another person, would select a future, one of multiple possible futures, in which that person would be, that Jew would be helped also by another Jew, just as he did or she did. So this is fascinating. It's a new paradigm, God's physics paradigm, that replaces the whole way that science looks at the world, and it changes things in our own perception. We understand the world was not created, God forbid, by chance, like the Big Bang model. We understand that the world is being carried and governed and watched over in Hashgacha Pratit. Every pixel is being created, every atom is being created many billions of times per second. And we understand that our moral choices make a huge difference, both for our own future, because the Shem will choose a future that is resonating, that is equivalent to our good choices, and also that the whole progression, we're partners, so to speak, with the Shem in leading the world towards this Geula state. Perhaps I will just complete this talk by something that converges with what the Admor Zaken says in the Tanya, the Tanya Akdisha, which is that one of the ways that a Jewish person can develop yirah and ahava, reverence and love towards the Shem, is by looking at the Gadlut Hashem, at the infinite power and wisdom of the Shem. And I gave this example, but I always like to give this example because it's in a sense similar to some of the awe and astonishment that I myself experienced when I was discovering this God's physics. And I'm saying, when you sit in your Bet Midrash, in your synagogue and Bet Midrash, and you close your eyes and imagine all the books in the Bet Midrash, and it's very hard even to remember all the names of the books, right? And then if I asked you to imagine all the letters in the books in the Bet Midrash or synagogue, it would be impossible. And so we understand that for us Jewish individuals or Jews, for us even to imagine, just to imagine the names of the books, much less so all the letters of the books in just a big holy Bet Midrash, is impossible. Now imagine that the Shem has to remember, sustain, and evolve every pixel in the universe many, many billions of times per second. That's incomprehensible. And not just to remember, sustain, and evolve, because our beard is growing, a baby is evolving, etc. Trees and plants are growing. So the Shem has to remember, sustain, and evolve simultaneously all the universe, all the atoms, all the human beings, all the animals, so many billions times per second, and he has to remember and select the right future for each individual based on their moral choices. And this whole thing is also moving harmoniously towards this Geula state. And let's finish with what the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach said. And obviously the Riyal annual conferences, which do a wonderful job, they're in memory of the Rebbe's brother, who was a mathematician and scientist. And the Rebbe says that all we have to do is open our eyes and see. And part of that opening our eyes and seeing Geula is realizing that Aleph, the Alufo Shel Olam, the power of the Shem, is with us all the time. And a day will come, not too far in the future, that the same way that you stop today any person in the world and ask them, what is your body made of? What is the world made of? And a person would say, oh, it's made of atoms. And if I would push them a little bit and ask them, how do you know that your body is made up of atoms? How do you know that the wall is made up of atoms? The person would say, well, I didn't see it myself, but I know that scientists have discovered that. Okay, that's fine, but imagine a world, this is happening as we speak with God's physics book and this whole new understanding. Imagine a world that a Jewish person and also a non-Jewish person would look at the world, and because they know that science has proven, I don't have the length here to talk about some of the ways that this theory is being proven, and my call for scientists, physicists, astronomers to verify this, some of the predictions of this theory, including the expansion of the universe on Jewish Rosh Hashanah New Year. But it's happening as we speak. There are already initial verifications, and Be'ezrat Hashem, God willing, this will become common knowledge. Imagine a situation in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, that all the scientists in the world, and by that time all the people in the world, would know that really, when you look at anything, any material object, including our bodies, anything that you look at is not material. It's not comprised of atoms. It's comprised of this Yud that's creating, dissolving, creating, evolving, that's taking care of, in Hashgacha Pratit, of everything in the world. So then a person would look and say, well, the world is not material. The world is the creation of the Shem. It's really a manifestation of the Shem. Everything is a manifestation of the Shem. That's why we have to treat each other in a moral way. That's why in the time of Geula there cannot be any war. There has to be peace. There has to be harmony. There has to be a reverence, yirah ve'ahava k'lpei Hashem. So again, it's a pleasure to be with you today, and I encourage everybody to take a look at this new God's Physics book, which I wrote especially by iUniverse.com, which I wrote especially for the general public, the layman reader. And we live in very exciting times, time of Geula. Thank you very much.